So we're starting Unit 5, and if you'll make sure that you're on your notes, page 97. And so page 97 looks at Unit 5. Unit 5 is about the unity and the diversity of life together. And so we just finished talking about evolution and how the very first cells might have been PNH, prokaryotic, anaerobic, heterotrophic. Over time, as they reproduced, they accumulated mutations, gradualism, and we arrived at groups of diversity, so lots of different types of life forms, but they do have some things in common. They're all cells, and so we're going to be looking at how is life unified, how is life diverse. So we start by looking at what do all living things have in common. So we want to bring you back to the very beginning of the year.
So all living things evolved from an original set of cells, and so they share these common characteristics. So going back to Stirninger, they all perform synthesis, transport, excretion, regulation, nutrition, growth and development, reproduction, and respiration.
And so you might want to take this time to go back and remember what these words mean. Synthesis means to make, transport means to move. So taking a few minutes to think back about what each of these words mean, maybe even flipping back to Unit 1 would be a good thing. And here's a phylogenetic tree. It doesn't represent every living thing because we've identified more than 2 million species, but it represents the idea that we could have had a set of original cells that evolved and that share similar characteristics.
So living things do have differences, so they are classified based on their physical and evolutionary similarities. And we break this down into 3 domains. You have domain bacteria, which contains only one kingdom, Eubacteria. Domain archaea, which contains one kingdom of Archaebacteria. And domain eukarya, which contains our 4 diverse kingdoms of eukaryotic cells.
So if you go back to our last unit, we had our levels of classification were domain, and then King Philip came over for grape soda, green soup, crossed oak, however you remembered it. But domain was kind of the first time that we classified. And when we classify into these domains, there are a few things we want to hold on to. Remember the prefix EU means true. So domain Eubacteria are what we think of as normal bacteria, like Staphylococcus aureus that causes skin infections, strep that causes like throat infections. Any bacteria that you've been infected with is probably a Eubacteria. And then we'll talk a little bit more about archaea, but we do want to notice that 4 of the kingdoms are grouped together under domain Eubacteria.
So first we start out with our Eubacteria. Our Eubacteria, remember, are prokaryotic and unicellular. They have a cell wall. Some of them can make their own food, and some will consume food. Some unique features, they're decomposers, can cause disease.
So when we take a second here and we're looking at, there are 6 kingdoms. So you're on the back now, and you're filling in this chart. You might need to pause. But domain Eubacteria actually includes the kingdom Eubacteria. But we do have to have that level domain in order to really see that some of the kingdoms are similar. So when we go back here, kingdom bacteria belongs to domain bacteria. Kingdom archaea belongs to domain archaea. But we need this domain to show that those 4 kingdoms have a lot in common. So like Ms. Luong said, the Eubacteria, we've talked about a lot already this year. You should already know that bacteria are prokaryotic, and you should know what that means, no nucleus. They do have a cell wall, and we're going to explore that some of them make food and some consume food.
With our Archaebacteria, they're prokaryotic and unicellular, very similar. They both have a cell wall. Some of them make food, some of them need to consume food, and the special thing about these is that they can live in extreme environments.
So if you've ever heard of the Dead Sea, The Dead Sea is really, really salty, and normally that would kill all life. There are no fishes, no plants, nothing lives in the Dead Sea except some archaebacteria. So they have found these bacteria can live in what are called inhospitable or really difficult places to live. They'll live in the thermal vents at the bottom of the ocean. They'll live where it's really acidic, like in your intestines. And so these are unique bacteria, and they're different enough from eubacteria that they get their own classification, but they're still pretty simple cells.
Then we have Kingdom Protista. These are one of our first of our eukaryotic, or one of the first from our domain eukarya. They can be unicellular or multicellular. They have our complex organelles. They can have a cell wall. Some of them make food, some consume food, and they can be plant or animal-like, or even fungi-like.
And so one example we actually really want you to know is algae. Algae, a lot of people think is a plant because it's green, but it actually is a protist. It's a multicellular protist, but it's still a protist. So it's eukaryotic. It will make its own food. It's like a plant, but it can't transport like we're going to see that plants can. An example of one being animal-like is what's called an amoeba. We'll talk about amoebas tomorrow, but maybe you want to look them up real quick. You could even pause and use your Google or search engine. And then slime molds are examples of fungi. So we'll look at some pictures of them tomorrow. They look like a fungus, but they don't have the correct body features of a fungus.
Then we have Kingdom Plantae. They're eukaryotic, multicellular, have our complex organelles, specifically have chloroplasts and that cell wall. They're autotrophic, meaning they make their own food, and they're producers within our food web.
So keep in mind what we're trying to do right now. We've just studied how life started and how life might have evolved to become so diverse. So what we're trying to do is separate or classify or group living things. So we have groups of bacteria, we have groups of other organisms called protists, and those are new to you. We'll explore them more tomorrow. Plants should actually be pretty familiar to you. So thinking about what is a plant, it's many cells, many complex cells, and it makes its own food. So trying to really think about what do I know already about plants.
Then next we have Kingdom Fungi, eukaryotic. They can be unicellular or multicellular. They have our organelles and a cell wall, but they actually perform extracellular digestion, meaning they have to consume food. They can't make their own food. And as part of the food web or ecosystem, there are decomposers.
So a lot of people think that fungi are plants because they grow out of the ground, but they don't make their own food. They actually have to consume food. And they do it in a really unique way where they actually decompose or break down waste. So if you look about where you might see fungus, it's usually growing maybe on a dead tree. What they do is pretty weird. They secrete enzymes. Now when you eat or when you consume, you put food in your mouth, you chew it up, it goes to your stomach, and that's where your enzymes are. For a fungus, they actually secrete enzymes into their surroundings. That breaks down the food, and then they slurp it up. So it's kind of like if you were to spit out your enzymes into a bowl of spaghetti, let it break down, and then slurp it up. That's kind of what fungi do. Now keep in mind this is your general mushroom, but it also includes things like yeast and mold and mildew. All of those are examples of fungi.
And then our last kingdom is the animal kingdom. Of course, eukaryotic cells, multicellular, contain organelles, specifically or most importantly, no cell wall. Animal cells, of course, are heterotrophs, meaning they have to consume food, and they're consumers in our food web.
And so you know animals, but one of the things to really hold on to is this idea that they don't have a cell wall. The ability of an animal to move, that's pretty unique to these kingdoms. Animals are one of the kingdoms that have the most mobility. Now, all of these can somehow transport, maybe in and out of a cell, maybe from cell to cell, but animals are the ones that have the most mobility, and that's because their cells are flexible without a cell wall. So this is really where we end with this chart, and tomorrow we're going to do a little practice about what each of these kingdoms are. If you get a chance to start on your apps, Your apps are going to be on page 99, number 1 through 7.